Welcome to another installment of our looking at our hymns and how they came about and what do they have to say to us theologically and musically. Our first hymn for this week is in the Evangelical Lutheran Worship, ELW hymnal. It's number 516, Almighty God, your word is cast, like seed into the ground. Now let the dew of heaven descend and righteous fruits abound. This hymn was written by the Anglican priest John Cawood, who lived from 1775 to 1852. He was a curate at St. John's Chapel of Ease in Worcestershire from 1814 until his death. This hymn was written in 1819 and was written in 6 stanzas to be sung after the sermon. The ELW only produced 4 of them. The hymn is reminiscent of Jesus' parable of the sower, which is found in Matthew 13, Mark 4, and Luke 8.
So the tune for this one is St. Flavian, and it's an example of an older tune that was sort of rhythmically smoothed out. We have an example of this with A Mighty Fortress is Our God. We have the rhythmic version, and then it's sort of, not simplified, but really smoothed out. It fits a simpler meter, so it's easier to sing along to. As it is now, with this simpler compression, we first got that in 1853. But the first usage of them sort of singing it more common like that is 1599. But this hymn goes all the way back to originally 1562. So it's one of the older ones in the hymnal, but certainly not the oldest. Now, if you want something to listen to whenever I play through this recording, in music we have something called a deceptive cadence, which is when it sounds like it's going to resolve and then it sort of tricks you at the last second. And so we have 2 lines here in the hymnal, 2 lines for the tune, and it's separated into 4 parts. If you listen to this recording, you'll hear at the end of the second part, it's a deceptive cadence. So now when you hear it, you'll recognize it, you'll see how it's kind of misleading, and now you'll know what it's called.
Next in our lineup is hymn number 533, Open Now Thy Gates of Beauty. This hymn was written by Benjamin Schmolk, who died in 1737. He was also the composer of one of my favorite hymns and the one that was actually the hymn of the day at my ordination, Liebster Jesu, wir sind hier. He was born in Silesia, which is now a part of Poland. He was a pastor's kid, and he studied at the University of Leipzig. He was ordained and served as the assistant pastor to his father, and then moved to a different parish. He was a very prolific writer. He wrote over 900, some say 1,100 hymns and various devotional works. This hymn was originally written in 7 German stanzas, and Catherine Winkworth translated 5 of the stanzas into English, omitting stanzas 3 and 7, including it in her chorale book for England in 1863. This hymn comes to us with minor changes from the service book and hymnal, the red hymnal, and the green hymnal, the Lutheran Book of Worship.
The tune is another example of one where it's sort of an older tune that we've taken and put to a newer text. The tune goes back as far as mid-late 17th century, so like the 1660s. But this pairing with this text comes around 1863. Now what's important about its original date, the melody being in the late 1600s, is that intervals were more important. The way we used intervals in music, interval being a distance between 2 notes on a piano, if it helps to visualize it, we just sort of use whatever we like the sound of now. There was a time when It was very important which one you used. And at this time, we really liked thirds, we liked fourths, and very specific ones, but this hymn specifically has a major sixth. Now, you'll hear that it goes from an F to a D in the first two lines of this hymn in the melody. And now that I've pointed it out, you'll probably recognize it's quite the leap up. The reason we're able to do that leap is because around this time, organs started to accompany the choir. And so they didn't have to just sort of imagine the pitch and jump to it and sort of aim for it, but rather they had the help of the instrument. And it really allowed them to push into new types of intervals. So when you're listening, it's the end of the first and the second line, you'll hear that sort of jump.
Our final hymn is 660, Lift High the Cross. This is a great hymn that we often use in procession because, well, we have a processional cross, and it's a great visual for this hymn. It was written by George W. Kitchen, who was an Anglican priest. He wrote it for the festival of the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel, which was held in England at Winchester Cathedral in 1887. Another priest, Michael Newbold, made some alterations to it when it was published in the second supplement to the Church of England's hymnal, Hymns Ancient and Modern, in 1916. And this hymn serves as a reminder that we all follow behind the cross, and that it is in the cross and in the crucified one that we have the victory.
And compared to the other two, this tune is relatively new. It came around in 1916, was when it was first published in a hymnal, and the tune's called Crucifer. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the harmony. So we have two sections of this, right? We have the refrain and we have the verses on the bottom half of the hymnal, if you have it open. The refrain is very diligent in a key called C major. So you sort of hear it stay within that sort of sound. It doesn't jump around, it's not too confusing. The refrain, throughout both of them, or throughout both lines of the refrain, does two completely different keys. And so you'll hear this sudden transition whenever it gets to the refrain, not just to a different key, but to a minor key. So it's a sort of drop emotionally. It gets a little bit darker, but that's important because it starts a little bit darker, and by the time you get to the end of the verse, you're in a completely new key, and it's in G major. Now, G major, if you can imagine the key G on a piano and key C, it's higher up. So it feels like you've reached a peak when you get to the end of the verses, and you have to sort of calm down a little bit to do the refrain again. It drops, and you'll hear that. So there's that little shift when you get to the verses, it gets a little darker, and by the end of the verses, it's high above any other point you've been at in the hymn. So that's what to listen to, I think, when you hear this recording.